Welcome back. How many of you know Muslim women or women of other faith backgrounds who prefer working out in women-only spaces but just aren't able to easily find out or access these spaces? I have many friends who find themselves in this situation and have either given up working out or try to do whatever they can in their homes. But is this the standard we should be aspiring to? We'll explore these questions with Kara Joy Iden. Kara has recently completed her honors kinesiology degree at McMaster University. She has studied exercise psychology, sports injuries, and fundamentals of rehabilitation. She currently works for Amana Fitness and also coaches introductory women's parkour. Kara, welcome back to our show.
Thanks again for having me.
So I want to talk about access to spaces for women. So let's begin with your own experience. So when you started, practicing parkour in university, what was your experience like with the space itself?
Well, with parkour itself as a sport, the space is really unique because you can do parkour literally anywhere. So it's very cost efficient, as in zero cost, which is really great. The space, as I mentioned before too, since it's co-ed, it's something I decided to move more away from to create my own women's space as well. So what triggered you to say, okay, this space isn't working for me? What was it about the co-ed space that you just weren't comfortable with? I suppose just the Islamic values coming in. Everyone I was with was very comfortable to be around, but I decided it's something that I would prefer to move towards a women's only environment. And then I also found that women felt a lot more comfortable with a women's only environment and would stay more and be more involved in the sport as well. So that was a big positive for me.
And then for you, were you finding that with only Muslim women, or because for you said it was an Islamic aspect of wanting to move to women's only spaces, but were you finding that with women of other faith backgrounds as well?
Yeah, other faith backgrounds and non-Muslims also, people who don't adhere to a particular religion, we're all finding it more comfortable. So especially just due to the discrepancy in how much, in the progression essentially.
Okay, so then what would you say to someone who says, they might be watching and say, well, aren't you creating some sort of exclusivity to say, okay, we want women only spaces, why exclude the men? What would you say to that?
I personally feel that we need women's spaces and men's spaces. I know that a lot of men struggle to go, Muslim men in particular struggle to go to gyms and such because there's women there as well and they're not as comfortable. So I would say that we need both. So it's not a matter of just women needing a space, but women and men each needing their own space would be a really positive thing, I think. And I've found that too, and from speaking with people as well, there's a very good brotherly community and there's a really good sisterly community, and I find that those relationships build stronger and better and faster when it's more in that community.
So how do we address, I guess in your own experiences, what have you been finding, because you started doing your own coaching, right? Did you find access to women-only spaces easy, or what were some of the challenges when it came to actually finding these spaces?
I would say difficult for sure, because parkour is a relatively new sport and it tends to be more men. There's definitely more women coming in more and more. And then on top of that, we're also in a society that doesn't typically do segregation. So it's definitely challenging. So I've been taking steps towards by first creating my own women's parkour community, but even still it's outdoors and such, so there are people around. And then moving that as well, I've run a few events that are in a gymnastics gym where we can block everything out and Muslim women can be completely comfortable, exercise just around other women and such. So it's a progressional thing for what I've been trying to do, but it's certainly challenging because the society we're in simply doesn't do it on the regular.
So how do you when it comes to, okay, you have your community and you want to rent a gym, what's that process been like?
It's been relatively easy as of so far, just because I already had previous contacts with the gym. I knew there weren't cameras in the gym. I also knew that the windows I could easily block out and there was a separate lobby, so that was okay, but it's certainly that's more of a blessing than anything, I would say. So it does take some digging around if you don't already have previous experiences with those things, especially finding environments without windows or all those extra considerations if women want to take off their hijab and such.
And do you find like the gyms are generally like, at least the organizations that you've worked with, are they generally supportive and understanding, or do you feel like there's an education barrier where you actually have to explain, well, this is the situation, this is what I'm doing, like you kind of have to present your case for them to like think about it and then be like, okay.
They've been really, really good. for sure. They've been a little bit like, okay, curious. It's not something they've ever seen before. So I've kind of explained it just because I mean, like, we all walk in wearing like skirts and hijabs, and then we're all in the gym like totally different people, basically. So they're kind of like, okay, interesting, because we'll have female coaches work with it. But they've been really great about it. So
what advice would you have? Because I know even like, you know, spaces that in Toronto area, I live in the Toronto area, and I know like we've gone a space for a boxing class, but even that, like, we have curtains that we're able to cover, and then, you know, some of the sisters like will put pins on it to make sure, but you still have guys at times walking around, which makes people uncomfortable. And personally for me, I don't feel comfortable taking out my hijab. So what's in terms of your experience dealing with these spaces, how should we start broaching this issue with the broader community?
I think it's a matter of awareness. I don't think anyone is intentionally barring women's spaces, and certainly they're up and coming. There's, in a lot of gyms now, do women's only spaces. A lot of gyms will have a section for women and whatnot. So it's up and coming, but I think it's still more for the general community than Muslim specific. Like you said, there'll still be men walking around and such. So I think it's a matter of kind of getting the word out there, letting people know, and sort of advocating for that. And actually, I would almost argue it's more challenging on the men's front, because it's a big.
That's not something you hear about, right?
It's a big taboo for men to be like, oh, we want our own space. So women need that space too, for sure. All the same equipment, all that such. So it shouldn't be exclusive in the sense of one is getting better than the other necessarily, but men too also struggle to go to pools, to gyms, things like that. So kind of establishing that and giving the background of having, this is why we like doing this, because we found that there's better relationships between men and better relationships between women, and more adherence to exercise and in general.
So Kara, what about, you know, some people who are watching our show who might be who are sports organizations, or even individuals who are like, okay, yes, we need male spaces, we need female spaces, and maybe they don't have relationships with community centers or gyms. How did you establish, I guess, what are some strategies that you use to establish relationships?
I would say first, knowing kind of where your skills are or your interests. Fortunately, you can do a lot of self-directed learning too if you're wanting to get into a new sport, but don't want to go into space initially to start it. And then I would say just sort of calling up, going in, letting them know. I think it's a good example to be able to go as a Muslim and explain, hey, we're looking for this kind of space. This is what we'd like to do. We'd like to run women's only events or men's only events and whatnot, and sort of establish those relationships.
And is that how sort of you went about it, but with your own relationship, building your own relationships?
Yeah, I suppose so, yeah. So I was actually training at the gym before I was Muslim already, so I already had a bit of contact with the admins, with some of the supervisors, things like that. So thankfully I kind of had that experience as a baseline, so that really facilitated it. But I would say if you're wanting to do that on your own, to just sort of go in and just speak with whoever the owners are of, whether it's gymnastics facilities or just like an open gym. Usually they have like blank hours at some point, so you can find a time where no one else is in there, the gym's not being used for anything, and they're happy to make some profit off of people coming in for that time. So it's a matter of asking.
And I guess that's open to also people of other faith backgrounds who don't identify themselves as Muslim and they want access to these spaces. It's sort of the same approach, right? Because I have non-Muslim friends who prefer practicing in a women's only space as well.
Right, yeah, and actually the last time I rented out the gymnastics gym and we made it all hijab friendly and everything like that, we had several women of other faiths as well, and it ended up sparking like, hey, maybe we could even do like a once a month regular gym rental for a woman to just come in, any woman that wants. So, and
I think it's really interesting because there's an Islamic element too, but we're starting to see that it's not just a Muslim issue, right? Like it's something that a lot of men and a lot of women, obviously women are more vocal about this, but it's clear that it's sort of a broader issue, broader concern rather. What about clothing when it comes to working out? I know a lot of the times when I go to the gym, well, rarely, but when I do, it's you have women wearing tights and shirts. What about some women who just aren't comfortable, even in women's only spaces, doing that? How do you sort of overcome that challenge for women who might feel like, okay, I'd still go to the gym, but I'm not comfortable with the wardrobe? How would you address that?
Right, and well, certainly as Muslim women, we have our aura to adhere to, even in front of other women. So thankfully, there is actually a lot of more and more options coming out. I mean, even Nike released hijab recently. So I think even mainstream is kind of jumping on the bandwagon of modest clothing, whether they're doing it for the values of modesty or just for extra profit, basically. But who knows? I mean, it's great to see that it opens up the doors a lot. So personally, I've found it relatively okay that if I'm in an environment where it's woman only, whether it's curtained or a full wall, I'll kind of gauge whether I keep just like a one-piece hijab on and throw it on, and then a long sleeve t-shirt, and I don't go like as loose as I would if it was outside or anything like that. But
and I guess with parkour, the wardrobe is pretty comfortable, right? How's the...
It is, yeah. It's mostly sweatpants, which is great. I also wear the harem pants, so they come down all the way to the ankle, the middle bit, and then they're tight at the legs. So it flows. A lot of people have actually been like, "Oh, I love your skirt." I'm like, "Oh, they're pants actually." So yeah, so I find that really great, and then paired with a nice long sleeve shirt and some sleeves and such. And
I'm sure people will be curious, where do you get those kinds of pants from? Because they sound very appealing.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of Muslim companies now that are actually opening it up with looser pants and very long sleeve shirts past the knee and such. So those are options. Otherwise, I also just look at there's websites like harempants.com or any of those sort of things. So if you kind of go for the boho look, if you will, that has a good option for that. So
it's interesting because I'm recalling now, actually a friend put a Facebook post about where can I find nice, comfortable clothing. Right. And the sister said that she actually went to the men's section to buy those clothes because the men's are much more looser than the women's section. That's
another, like, especially for t-shirts, you get the full cuff rather than a lot of like the drop necks and stuff that women's stuff tends to have. So that's definitely an option. I've had several non-Muslims as well compliment me on my pants.
Oh, awesome. Okay, I'm going to check them
out. I relax in them, I exercise in them.
All inclusive.
Yeah.
Okay, so as we wrap up, I think a very important question for us as a whole. Where does the onus lie? Is it on the fitness centers and the gyms now that they're aware, like the few ones, right? Is it the onus on them to create women's only spaces? Which, we do know some gyms have done that. I think the YMCA has a women's only space. I think there's a Good Life Fitness Center, I think, that has a women's only hours or speed gym. I'm not sure. Yeah, one of the two. So is the onus on organizations like that, or is the onus on the individuals to go and advocate and say, hey, this is a priority for me, I want to do this? Whose responsibility is it, do you think? Based on your, from a sports perspective, from just as a woman, what do you think?
I would say, I suppose initially, it would be great if the fitness companies were right in on it immediately, but I think a lot of the time they just don't recognize the need.
Yeah.
Or don't recognize that even women's spaces for Muslim women, we need it completely on their own. So I think while we kind of build that, it's on the community to sort of start building those steps and getting into Muslims running these facilities. Like if Muslims own these facilities, then we would have that already established. So kind of like reaching into those realms, getting into that, and basically bringing out awareness for the existing places that, hey, these are something that Muslim women need, Muslim men need. So yeah.
I look forward to you opening your own fitness center someday.
That would be nice, inshallah, if Allah wills. So.
Inshallah. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on our show. Hey YouTube, we hope you benefited from this video. If you liked it, or if you didn't, let us know in the comments below. And if you're interested in learning more, check out some of our other videos. And don't forget to subscribe so you can get new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.